Even though it appeared like every door would lock before he could enter, Sylvester Stallone's life narrative is one of unflinching tenacity and an unshakable ambition to succeed. His journey from a difficult childhood to becoming one of the most well-known action heroes in the world not only captivates fans, but also shows how perseverance and self-belief can overcome nearly any challenge. The story that follows details his incredible journey, from the streets of New York to the heartbreaks of family tragedy, to the moment of success when spectators all over the world fell in love with his alter ego, Rocky Balboa. Sly obviously overreacted. He is now in his 70s. How was it that he survived? Given the startling number of injuries he has sustained during his life, people occasionally pose queries like that. Despite the fact that action actors frequently sustain injuries, Sylvester Stallone appeared to suffer setback after setback without ever fully recovering. He recovered from the acid attack. He was shot, but he made a full recovery. He survived even when his own mother tried to hurt him when he was a baby. Those bouts taught him a valuable lesson. It's more vital to be able to take a hammering and not give up than it is to hit hard. However, years later, even this otherwise indestructible man would suffer a hit so terrible and unimaginable that he would be unable to just get back up and act as if it had never occurred. There was nothing he could do to avoid that catastrophe. His ability to endure, grieve, love, and accept would all be put to the test by the catastrophe he would encounter. It's important to comprehend how Sylvester Stallone's early life influenced the man we came to admire. Before delving into that intense personal grief, he frequently mentioned his mother's heartless comments. "The only reason you're here is because the hanger didn't work," she'd reply. In a more severe memory, she once said she would have frozen him on a ledge if there had been a true issue with his brain. These startling tales show the type of atmosphere he was raised in. When you're young and don't have many friends or acquaintances to compare your household to, you can make the foolish assumption that everyone's is the same. The idea of a happy home was foreign to Stallone. He fled to Philadelphia when he was 11 years old in order to locate his mother who had left him. Inevitably, the legal system intervened and sent him back to his violent father. Much of the psychological harm had already been done by that point. Because it felt natural to him, Stallone's tumultuous upbringing made him somewhat of a renegade canon, driven to chaos and suffering. Acting proved to be his savior and lifeline in a society that looked meant to destroy any optimism he dared to have. Stallone subsequently stated, "I just wanted to feel heroic. I was totally absorbed in fantasy and non-reality. I would spend hours watching the same movie 5 or 6 times in a row in theaters. I imagined myself leading that life, overcoming evil, working hard, and fighting against overwhelming obstacles. I was always a hero worshiper. I wanted to be the one who saves lives and improves the world." As quickly as he could, Sylvester left the house. Without any real money, a plan, or a safe place to stay, he recalled, "My life was on the wane. I had absolutely nothing. Every day on the streets was a new struggle for survival, with robberies, car crashes, physical assaults, and even acid being thrown at him. I slept in bus terminals and alcoves, and my coat was my home." He was physically, emotionally, and spiritually exhausted. The outside world saw him as a hopeless dreamer, but he still hoped that one day he would make it. He thought he had what it took to be a big-screen action star. He brought his portfolio and headshots to numerous agencies, but each time he was informed, "We're not accepting new talent." Or, "Your speech is strange." One agent even asked him if he had a speech problem. His mother, 9 months pregnant, wandered aimlessly on buses out of fear of bearing a child, and Stallone, forced to face the reality that he was born in a New York charity ward, remarked, "Your eyes droop." She had to be hurried off a bus in the last moments to travel to a local charity unit where Sylvester was born. His distinctive frown and somewhat slurred speech were caused by partially paralyzed nerves on one side of his lips from a poorly delivered speech. He was informed that his physical characteristics kept him from obtaining prominent Hollywood roles. He was either restricted to working as a prop man in theaters or typecast as a gangster. Disillusioned, he thought about giving up acting completely. Despite being rejected from multiple auditions, he had an instinctive desire to be the protagonist of his own story. "I'll take all my anger and pour them into the page," he remarked. Perhaps I should just write scripts instead, I thought. Stallone worked to distance himself from almost everyone and channel his frustrations and aspirations into his writing, producing screenplay after screenplay. He was convinced that he would eventually create something spectacular, something that could only work with him in the lead. After he managed to scrape together enough money to leave New York, he packed up everything he owned, drove 11 days to Los Angeles, and spent $40 on a used car. The only person he knew in Los Angeles was Henry Winkler, who at the time was well known for playing the Fonz on Happy Days. In a moment so poetic that it seemed predestined, his car broke down at Hollywood and Vine. Sylvester called Henry in desperation, but Henry was unable to take him in because he had his own family to take care of, but he assisted Stallone in finding a cheap motel where he spent the first few nights before locating a dilapidated apartment in the valley close to Balboa Boulevard. Stallone would later say, "That was the fuel I needed. I had to give my next script my all after hitting that rock bottom." Stallone's wife was expecting, and he had to sell his beloved dog since he could no longer provide it the required care due to rising pressure and fast decreasing cash. My wife was expecting, I had just sold my dog, I had $106 in the bank, and my rent was $300. Stallone remembered, I heard the wolf at the door. If this script didn't work, he had nowhere else to turn to. So he sat down in desperation to write what would become Rocky in around 3.5 days. Rocky Balboa was a down-and-out boxer from the gritty neighborhoods of Philadelphia, easily dismissed by those who saw only his slurred speech and imposing size. All the grief, humiliations, and anguish became part of his DNA. According to Stallone, just by the way he walks, people assume he's a bully or some dark character. In this way, Rocky was a continuation of Stallone. Underappreciated, misunderstood, but full of untapped potential. In spite of the temptation, Stallone turned down offers that soared over $360,000 because he was certain that he would never forgive himself if he sold his script without appearing in it. After 25 revisions, he had a finished screenplay that he was confident of, so he started to haggle. However, the studios made an offer that he couldn't refuse. They wanted the screenplay, but not Stallone in the lead role. And they offered to buy him out of his own dream for $25,000, $100,000, $150,000, and more. In the end, a studio gave in and inserted a number of strange clauses in the contract that allowed them to fire him in the middle of filming if he acted out or violated any of the bizarre rules. But he didn't care because he was officially set to play Rocky Balboa. Stallone claimed that he had long since mastered the art of living off nothing, and that he could do so for some time longer if it meant sticking to the one thing that could change his life. His own agents declared him insane, saying, "That's a huge sum of money, especially for someone who could hardly afford to eat." People waited for blocks around the city to see the underdog story that so closely mirrored Sylvester Stallone's own life, which saw him go from being a poor dreamer to a Hollywood star overnight. Rocky became more than just a box office hit. It became a sensation that connected with viewers all over the US and eventually the world. No one, not even Stallone himself, could have predicted the cultural explosion that Rocky would become. It was the most intense Rocky craze ever. Training gear, t-shirts, and posters of Rocky's victorious figure were everywhere, and Stallone was shocked. It was unbelievable how long I had that poor boy syndrome. When reporters asked him if he felt comfortable being associated with Rocky, he replied, "All of a sudden, the gates of fantasy opened." "Are you serious? I wish I were Rocky," that was his earnest response. The award season was when this mental struggle was most evident, as despite the excitement of success, Stallone struggled with the fact that he could never truly become the unstoppable hero he had portrayed on television. Fans saw him as Rocky Balboa, despite his awareness that he was only a man with vulnerabilities, a difficult past, and a complicated family history. And the winner is Rocky. And the winner is Rocky. But then he remembered that his mother was no longer with him. He had invited her, of course, but she had declined unless he had also invited her hairstylist, Vivian. Stallone had 2 tickets, one for himself and one for his mother, and he had no way to accommodate Vivian. Instead of making a compromise, his mother just decided not to go. Stallone had spent his entire life demonstrating to his parents, and particularly to his mother, that he was deserving of respect, love, and admiration, but she was unconvinced, even as he walked up the Academy Awards platform. "Have they ever told you that they are proud of you?" he was asked, and his response was straightforward: "No, not at all." Jacqueline Stallone, his mother, had led a peculiar life, resembling a colorful elder sister more than a mother figure in appearance and demeanor. She claimed to have been a showgirl, an astrologer, and a beauty pageant winner. Even at the height of his career, Stallone never got the personal approval he had long sought from his mother, and that disappointment affected how he treated his own children. She casually said in interviews, "There wouldn't be Sylvester Stallone if it weren't for me." Such statements went deeper than any criticism could. There wouldn't be any Sylvester at all if I decided I didn't want to be a mother. Stallone strived to leave a legacy that his children could honor and carry on because he was determined not to repeat the past. He wanted them to know that they were the center of his existence and that he was always there for them, regardless of how many stunts he performed or how many months he spent filming on distant sets, even going to physical limits that most people would find unthinkable. He put his all into every new film. Pushing boundaries was Stallone's obsession, and he would pull off his own stunts even if doing so seriously endangered his safety. "Performing your own stunts has a certain romance," he said. Stallone sought realism, drawing inspiration from the famous boxing match between Hagler and Hearns, and one famous incident happened during the filming of Rocky IV. He told his co-star Dolph Lundgren to punch him for real, saying, "But it's a different story when you're dealing with the aftermath of those stunts." Lundgren, who was taller and a skilled martial artist, delivered the blow that sent him to the hospital for 9 days. He was informed by doctors that the injuries resembled those sustained in head-on crashes. Along with his demanding filming schedule, Stallone's real-life injuries, which included many surgeries, pneumonia bouts, broken necks, and shattered bones, had a negative long-term impact on his physical and emotional well-being. Family members talked about how they were always concerned that one more surgery or accident might cause irreversible damage. Stallone appeared to be literally dependent on the suffering, as though it were the only way to remain faithful to the grim characters he played, despite these genuine hazards. Stallone had no idea that tragedy was going to strike at home, as he and Arnold Schwarzenegger were having a blast promoting The Expendables 2 at Comic-Con. Shortly after, he was devastated to learn that his 36-year-old son, Sage, had been discovered unconscious in his Los Angeles home. According to some, it may have been days before anyone found him. You may feel wonderful one moment, but then you find yourself back in the depths of despair. It comes in waves and never goes away. Stallone's entire world collapsed. If life had taught him anything, it was to put up with bodily pain. But after losing his child, he had never experienced such anguish. "Loss and grief are the hardest things in the world to live with," he added, his eyes welling with tears. "There is no script that can reverse the finality of death, and no amount of rewriting can bring back a kid." Stallone, who was a stranger in his own life after Sage's funeral, had always thought he could change his story and make it a triumphant one. His heartbreak persisted, rising and falling with the tide. The only thing that was really real, he realized, was family. Breathing, alive, bleeding, and now a piece of it had been cruelly taken away. According to Stallone, life is addition until the age of 40, after which it becomes subtraction. As your children grow up, your friends pass away, and your job ends, it feels like everything is slipping away from you. On that awful day, soon after losing Sage, Stallone said, "It dawned on me then that sometimes even the most powerful individuals in your life may not be as unbeatable as you believe." He described how everyone in the vicinity started crying, and he was left completely shaken by the thought of losing another child. He also had to deal with yet another terrifying situation. His daughter needed surgery to save. He recalled being terrified when a nurse casually said, "Okay, kiss your baby goodbye," as she took his daughter away. "Stop," he begged. "Reword that." He felt as if he were about to enter a hellish realm where he might lose another child. He felt tremendous regret for not spending more time at home, for missing out on opportunities for personal development, and for being away on movie sets all the time. He began to wonder if any stunt or film was worth the possible loss of so much valuable family time. Looking back at the past can sometimes help us understand the present. Stallone took his family back to Philadelphia, the birthplace of Rocky Balboa, and the city where Sylvester had gone as a boy, to find a mother who had abandoned him, in an attempt to regain perspective and possibly find some sort of atonement. Putting his palm on his shoulder, Stallone began by explaining to his daughters the meaning of a passage he had written in Rocky Balboa years earlier, not realizing how profoundly they would surprise him as they wandered the streets he knew so well. Where you used to fit right here, I'd hold you up and say to your mother, "This kid's gonna be the best kid in the world." He acknowledged that the line was exactly what he had always wanted to say to his children in real life. The film's famous quote, "The world ain't all sunshine and rainbows," was disclosed by his daughters. "But if you let it, this cruel place will beat you to your knees and hold you there. How hard you can take a hit and keep going is more significant than how hard you hit. That's how you succeed." Astonished by the moment, Stallone realized that his daughters still saw him through the prism of that speech, despite the chaos, the stunts, the surgeries, and the heartache. And he cried as he hugged them, thinking that maybe all the sacrifices were now being paid back. Stallone had never fully understood how much he had taught them about resiliency. Stallone had actually lost everything multiple times. But he had survived to see his children grow up to be amazing adults, and he had witnessed how Rocky had transcended his family and himself to become a cultural icon for millions of people. Standing in Philadelphia, where he had once been that scared, angry teenager seeking a mother's love, Stallone was overcome with gratitude and thought, "You know, you're the luckiest person in the world." Millions of fans around the world have also been inspired by Rocky's perseverance, which is a reflection of Stallone's own unwavering refusal to give up. He once remarked, "Rocky is now part of Americana. Every day, people mimic that triumphant sight and raise their arms in the air as they rush up the steps of the Philadelphia Museum of Art, turning it into a sort of ceremony that symbolizes any kind of temporary or minor personal triumph." Others have commended Stallone for crafting such a potent portrayal of tenacity and hope, pointing out that Rocky's sensitivity, humility, and accountability are just as strong as his toughness. Fans have remarked, "I was obsessed with Rocky, and I kept watching it, seeing myself getting back up after every set just like Rocky did. Where can I clearly depict a man's journey from failure to success?" Visitors to Philadelphia raise their arms in the air every day, imitating Rocky's victorious stair climb. Even Stallone acknowledges that he never thought that one movie, produced on a shoestring and in dire financial need, would spark such a potent cultural movement. "I asked myself this question." The ideal metaphor turned out to be the Philadelphia Steps. While Stallone acknowledged that he has been in the spotlight for decades longer than other actors and that he feels extremely fortunate and grateful for everything he has accomplished, he also acknowledged that fame is ephemeral and that life changes are inevitable. "I've had my time and I'm incredibly grateful for it," Stallone told his daughters. Stallone cautions future generations that life will always put them to the test, seemingly echoing the well-known statement from Rocky, "You're never asked, will you get knocked down?" He thinks that real success comes from conquering adversity rather than avoiding it. So instead, are you going to get back up? Every moment is an opportunity to grow, learn, and achieve. In retrospect, it is evident that Stallone endured almost every kind of hardship life could provide. An emotionally distant and abusive upbringing, repeated rejections by casting directors, disdain from film studios, injuries that left him in the hospital for days, and lastly, the unfathomable anguish of losing a child. Despite all of this, he never denied his suffering or his regrets. Instead, he used the fictional heroes he crafted on screen to become the real-life hero he aspired to be. Stallone had come full circle by the time he and his family returned to Philadelphia. His legacy of films that inspire people worldwide now immortalizes the poor kid who once slept at bus stops, was abandoned by his own mother, and was told he would never be anything more than a thug. He had learned that, despite their charm, fame and wealth could never fully erase a traumatic upbringing or shield a person from tragedy. But he also realized that love, real, imperfect, unadulterated, and complex love, could repair much of what had been lost. Since life isn't about perfect travels or happily ever afters, but rather about how we handle hardship and what we do when faced with unthinkable obstacles, Stallone realized that everything he had ever wanted to teach his children about hope and resiliency had already been conveyed through Rocky Balboa's persona. He heard his children memorize the speech, and as they recited those lines about how cruel and terrible life is and how it will keep you down if you let it, ultimately, Sylvester Stallone's story serves as a reminder that, although accolades and box office records may serve as indicators of success, what really distinguishes a person is their ability to bounce back from setbacks. What they discover about love, family, and the transient nature of life is even more important. Stallone discovered that his greatest achievement was not having an Oscar above his head in a glistening auditorium, but rather being on those Philadelphia steps with his kids, knowing that they would continue to carry the legacy of hope and resiliency despite every tragedy, heartbreak, and friend lost.